Welcome! Today, we will learn how to counter the Ruy Lopez opening effectively. The game begins with the moves: pawn to e4, pawn to e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to b5. At this point, you play pawn to a6, pushing the bishop back. Next, I recommend the move pawn to d6, which can be deceptive. At first glance, it resembles the old-style Steinitz defense, but our actual plan is much more aggressive. After white castles, which is the most common move, instead of the passive move bishop to d7, we go for a sharper approach with bishop to g4, setting up strong counterplay. We pin the knight on f3 to the queen on d1. Secondly, here's a little spoiler. In many of these variations, we are actually going to castle queenside and develop a powerful attacking formation on the kingside. This will be a complete nightmare for white, because when they chose to play the Ruy Lopez opening, they were expecting a positional maneuvering game with a slight advantage. However, we will turn this into a massive attack against white's position. After bishop to g4, your opponent will often respond with pawn to h3, trying to drive the bishop away. Instead of retreating, you continue aggressively with pawn to h5, setting up a clever trap along the way. The best part is that we do not entirely rely on this trap. However, if white plays pawn takes g4, it will be a losing mistake, and many of your opponents will fall for it. Even if white does not fall for the trap, it does not matter because this aggressive plan is part of our strategy anyway. However, let's take a quick look at what happens if white captures on g4. By taking the pawn, white exposes the h-file, making their king extremely vulnerable. You will be able to checkmate white very quickly. For example, if white plays knight to h2 or knight to e1, it does not really matter. Then you simply bring your queen into the attack, and now all your pieces are lining up against white's king on g1. At this point, the game is practically over. If white moves their knight, you will checkmate them immediately. It is also important to note that if white tries to push their f-pawn forward at some point in an attempt to create an escape route for their king, you can shut it down immediately by playing pawn to g3. This move completely locks white's king in place, ensuring that checkmate is coming very soon. Returning to this position, we already know that if white plays pawn takes g4, it is a deadly mistake that leads to a quick loss. But what if white avoids this capture? In most cases, your opponents will feel extremely uncomfortable with this pin on the knight on f3 because they often have no clear idea how to deal with it or how to get rid of it. For now, let's return to our current position. Since white is unsure how to break the pin, they will typically play the standard move pawn to c3, which is a common idea in the Ruy Lopez opening. At this point, you respond with queen to f6, a very strong and multi-purpose move. First, it increases the pressure on the knight on f3, giving you the option to trade it off and weaken white's pawn structure if needed. This move also prepares for further attacking ideas, making white's position even more difficult to handle. Secondly, by playing queen to f6, you are also clearing the path for your king to castle queenside. This does not mean you will castle immediately, but it gives you the option to do so whenever the right moment arises. Keeping your king flexible is always a good strategic idea. Finally, from this square, your queen on f6 is also keeping an eye on pawn to d4, preventing white from executing their standard central break. Normally, white would love to push pawn to d4 to gain activity, but now your queen is controlling this square, ensuring that if white plays pawn to d4, you can capture it immediately and potentially win a pawn. Because of this, most of your opponents will play pawn to d3 instead, which is a more solid and passive move, simply trying to develop their pieces. At this point, your general game plan remains the same. Castle queenside, launch a pawn storm on the kingside, build up a powerful attacking formation. This is the core of your aggressive strategy. Of course, you must always stay cautious and watch what white is planning. Right now, you can continue with pawn to g5, pushing forward and increasing the attacking pressure. Since white is ready to capture this pawn on g5, simply pushing it forward is not an option right now. Additionally, you do not want to castle queenside immediately because white can trade on c6, weakening your pawn structure and potentially creating counterplay. So, what should you do instead? The best move here is knight to e7. This move serves multiple purposes. It reinforces the knight on c6, meaning you no longer need to worry about white capturing it. It acts as a waiting move, forcing white to commit to a plan. At this point, since white is still annoyed by the pin on the knight on f3, they will almost always play knight to d2, trying to break free from the pin. However, this move also comes with a downside. It blocks the bishop on c1, meaning white no longer controls the diagonal leading to the pawn on g5. Now that white can no longer attack this pawn, you can freely play pawn to g5, launching a powerful pawn storm on the kingside. White has very few effective ways to stop this attack, so they will typically play a standard move like rook to e1 or any other passive move. At this point, you respond with bishop to d7, an elegant and multifunctional move. This move achieves two key objectives. It removes the pin on the knight on c6, giving your position more flexibility. It clears the path for your pawn to advance further, allowing you to continue your kingside attack against white. Surprisingly, after a series of natural moves, white ends up in a completely lost position, with no real defense against your crushing kingside attack. In the game we are analyzing, white tried knight to h2, anticipating pawn to g4, but you play it anyway. Pawn to g4, breaking open white's kingside defenses. After the pawn trade, your rook joins the attack, increasing the pressure. White played knight to f1, a solid defensive move to reinforce the kingside, but it does not stop your attack. Although there is no immediate checkmate, you simply continue with castling queenside, completing development and maintaining a long-term attack that white cannot withstand. Eventually, you will checkmate white. In this game, white played pawn to f3, possibly to create space or trade pawns. However, black found a brilliant tactic, pawn to g3, sacrificing the pawn. After white captures, black follows up with rook takes h2, removing a key defender. Then queen to h4 check, forcing the king to move. Black wins two minor pieces for a rook and continues the attack. Now you can play bishop to g7, bring the other rook to the h-file, or maneuver the knight to h4 or f4. With a material advantage and a crushing attack, white is completely lost. Black's attacking plan remains consistent across different white responses. Generally, black will focus on launching a strong kingside attack, no matter how white responds. However, white may attempt to disrupt this strategy. Instead of playing a more passive move like pawn to d3, some opponents might try the more aggressive pawn to d4. This move is typically part of white's standard Ruy Lopez strategy, aiming to deflect black from their kingside attack. Yet, pawn to d4 overlooks black's queen on f6, which controls the d4 square. Black can easily capture the pawn, maintaining pressure and advancing the attack. First, play pawn to b5 to neutralize the pin, freeing your knight. After white's bishop retreats, you're ready to win the pawn on d4, eliminating a key defender. After a few exchanges, queen takes d4, and you are now a pawn up. If white captures, you can easily recapture. If white plays bishop to d5, it's not a problem because you can simply play knight to e7, defending your knight and threatening the bishop. Thus, bishop to d5 is ineffective for white. To recap, after pawn to d6, if white castles kingside, it leads to a strong kingside attack for black. Bishop to g4 initiates the attack, and with queen to f6 and pawn pushes, black develops a crushing attack. White is usually clueless on how to counter it. I hope you understand all variation. If you think this video is helpful for you, then don't forget to like and subscribe for more strategies. See you in the next video. Thanks for watching.